Welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at Frieren and more specifically the Frieren collab. To be honest, this is probably one of the coolest characters that I've seen in a long time. She, although I guess is presented as more of a DPS, I think she actually has a lot of potential even beyond this. Without further ado though, let's get into it. So the first thing we should talk about is her stats. Yes, she does have a Mage Leo constellation sort of setup, and with this she has pretty high attack, she's got decent speed, and 23 crit rate, which is nice, honestly. To add to this, she has a self-imprint of crit chance, so for those of you looking to use your slates, probably save up for something like this. But let's now actually move to the skills herself, or skills themselves. Now, to start off, at the start of battle, she grants 40% resource increase to all allies. Now, this by itself is already crazy because this means that for a lot of characters, including characters like Commander Pavel, characters like Famir, honestly any character you can think of, this basically lets you use or bypass a lot of the early restrictions from Fighting Spirit or Focus, and thereby lets you use their abilities quicker. Now, there's a whole insane number of characters that can honestly use this, and that includes characters like Taeyu. Really, we'll just have to wait and see, but that's not even just the end of her skill 2 passive, as in addition to this, during battle, when you have at least 4 souls or higher, you're also granted defensive magic. Now, with defensive magic, after being attacked, you increase the combat readiness of all allies by 10%, and this, though really interesting and nice, has a few caveats, I think, to it. First and foremost, as far as I understand, there is no cooldown on this, and so, effectively, at least if I'm understanding this right, there's a chance that you'll just keep endlessly draining your souls, and you know, obviously drain your souls up to or like below 4 souls in order to continuously prevent yourself from dying, which honestly is pretty interesting, but can also be a double-edged sword, as again, if you are using Frieren in say a cleave composition and you need 20 souls in order to activate a skill, if you end up getting counterattacked with Frieren or on a team with Frieren and she consumes 4 souls, this might actually be a bit of an issue, though of course I think in most cases you probably overcap a little bit at the start of battle when it comes to soul usage, so maybe not the most insane thing ever, but definitely something to keep an eye out for, as again, it drains souls, at least as I'm understanding it, any time that you get attacked, assuming that you can reapply it. Now, to add to this, we should actually talk about her true role, or at least it feels like what her true role as an individual character is designed to be. And with her skill 3, as you're seeing here, this is a team-wide, or rather, a solo attack increase to the caster for 3 turns, where she also then attacks all enemies with lightning magic, dispelling all buffs. Now, a bit of context for this, given the state of RTA and just given the state of most either Guild War or Arena defenses, whether or not you're actually going to be able to strip anything with someone like Frieren using this ability, I think is pretty low. You may be able to strip a buff from a character or from a DPS that for whatever reason doesn't have effect resistance, but as I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of as of late, not only do some buffs like the ER buff in RTA kind of affect your ability to debuff anyone in general anymore without dedicated effectiveness, there are also just a majority of DPSs in the game, or rather I should say a majority of DPSs in the game have like evasion, they have a revive mechanic, or they have something where this dispel doesn't do anything to begin with. That said, it is still a damage focused skill to begin with, and to add to this, it does increase her own combat readiness push by 50%, which I think will actually be kind of noteworthy, as this does actually set up into the next ability that we'll talk about. In case you were curious about the actual damage of this ability though, this does actually look to do a decent amount, not anything crazy. Like as you're seeing here, this is about 5,000, 5.7 thousand, 10.5k. To a team that has like Aureus, and on screen and team wise, this is a team that has an Armin, it has an Ilanov, and it has a Bright Senya on it. Obviously, it's not going to do any damage to a character like Afternoon Silk Flan, as she has evasion, as I previously mentioned about how most true DPSs in the game are or have some sort of survivability built into their kit. But that leads us into her next ability, which is her skill 1, rather, and this is honestly a pretty high damage dealing ability, but we'll see more about that in a second. Now, for this ability, first and foremost, when she uses an attack at any point, from what I understand, she grants herself immunity for 1 turn, which is nice. To add to this, however, when it's the caster's turn, you activate her skill 1, or she activates the extra part of her skill 1 as an extra attack. And with this, not only does the set attack give you a soul, it also AoEs instead of single targets, and it scales directly to the amount of health that the enemy has lost. Now, to add to this, she does have a 10 soul burn effect, which makes this pretty interesting in terms of DPS. But obviously, based on this, the thought or the theory, at least from what it looks like, is that you would use Frieren's skill 3, skill 1 to then obviously either crit and activate someone like a Cavill rather, or you would use S3 into S1 just to nuke she herself, I guess, or nuke with Frieren herself. However, as you're seeing, this first hit doesn't seem to do an insane amount of damage. Oh, sorry. So this amount of damage right here, 6,900 damage, it's okay. Honestly, not the most insane thing ever. However, as you'll see here in a second, this soul burn is kind of decent. It's about 12.3 thousand. Put all of those damage numbers basically together, and I do think you have a decently high DPS character. Like, I can imagine maybe in some cases you would use maybe like in a mid alongside the Frieren. You give her Gab, you use her skill 3 into skill 1, and maybe you activate a Cavill. And unlike the Para here, you would basically one-shot the enemy team. There's a chance that, again, with her multis that we eventually find out, this is a true nuker. But I think that just alone, Frieren offers so much potential just because, again, she activates or basically buffs all characters that have some sort of resource generation. Now, obviously, they included Commander Pavel here, as he's one of the more easy to understand fighting spirit characters. But I really think that Famir is going to be one of the larger winners of this patch, or of this update. But let's now actually talk about her artifact, because I think this also has a bit of potential as well. Now, I'll be honest, on initial look through for this artifact, I thought that when it said that you gain 20 souls and you also have a chance to gain additional souls, I thought that this literally gave you 40 souls at the start of combat, and I thought that was broken. Turns out, thankfully, that is not what this does. Now, again, this does only give you 2 souls at the start of turn, which again is not necessarily an insane amount, but this, for all intents and purposes, does power creep Book by every sense of the imagination. There is literally no difference effectively between this artifact and Book, except that this, if I'm not mistaken, this artifact should have more attack. This artifact gives you 2 souls, or has a chance to give you 2 souls at the start of your turn, which again will start to add up eventually. And with this, you would imagine that basically Frieren, I wouldn't say Frieren becomes invincible, but with other people taking turns, I would imagine it's quite difficult, actually, especially if your Frieren is fast, or if she has some sort of cycling or built-in, or she has some way to cycle or take more turns. It might actually be really difficult, I think, to deal with Frieren specifically, as she'll just keep reviving, or not reviving, but keep skill nulling, and then skill nulling, and then skill nulling, and then add this on top of a character like Lady of the Scales Mercedes, who now you can't kill her, and now she's skill nulled, now you can't kill her, and now she's skill nulled, and over all these things alongside the teased Rose character. All these actually seem like insane ways for a character or solo DPSs in the game to kind of just pop off. From my POV of this, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, as again, Frieren does look like a very interesting character, and she does have a lot of setup. And recently, especially with what they've changed or how they've affected the state of the game right now with characters like Setsuka and some slower characters, it is interesting to see a more DPS oriented character with Frieren. That said, again, although I think her damage could be pretty crazy depending on what we actually see, and as honestly, I don't think most people trust the gear that Smilegate puts on their units, I do want to see how her multipliers scale out. But otherwise, I think that you'll probably see the rise of characters like Famir, especially now that Famir has been changed so that she works with all elements. And in addition to this, honestly, when Famir was relevant, with the Sin and Faithless Litica Cleave, that character was one of the most insane DPSs, or rather, I guess, utility debuffers that we've ever seen in the game. And I'm hoping, or a bit excited, I guess, for her to come back, just because Frieren alongside Famir, honestly going to be probably one of my favorite combos to try out, especially for things like Guild War or Arena. That's it, guys. Honestly, I think Frieren looks pretty crazy. I didn't want to go over too many of these synergies with Fern or Stark, as I'll be specifically going over them in their own separate videos, because I want to dedicate a bit of time to really break down and analyze like what the character is going to be used for. However, if you're a Cleat player, or if you're, well, let's just be honest, if you're an Epic 7 player, you should probably pick up Frieren. However, specifically in terms of gameplay, I would imagine that Frieren's probably more dedicated towards aggressive, faster players as opposed to slow. Though, honestly, again, keep in mind that Frieren's kit doesn't just necessarily synergize with fast characters. There are slower characters that also have things like fighting spirit and focus. And yes, I'm looking at you, people that for some reason like Taeyu and also Navy Captain Landy. Who knows? Maybe even a Remnant Violet has these sort of, has a sort of gusto when paired with Frieren. And again, I'm sure that you could also make Frieren extremely tanky or slow, and you don't even need to dedicate yourself to any DPS, and you could probably find something like, I don't know, 14 to 15,000 HP easy if you're like base speed and you give yourself a bunch of tanks. Anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good luck on your pulls.